These are not yet known, but not unknowable. They're just unknown. These are stories that are hiding in plain sight in the data that we can understand as lawyers and practitioners. In the same way that doctors couldn't aggregate thousands of cases in a county medical practice. But once medicine became more quantitative, they could have hypotheses about how things might work or not.
How often do you make decisions based on a limited sample size? A hunch? A loose smattering of opinions and outcomes you've experienced in the past? It's time you start making your business and legal decisions based on hard data. Our guest this week is Ed Walters, the founder and CEO of Fastcase, a legal intelligence company, and author of the book Data-Driven Law. He joins us to tell us how to get started and go from anecdotes to anec-data and finally on to real data. We discuss how you can start using data that's currently available to make better informed decisions, win more cases, and attract more clients. Data can even provide a new class of legal services, growing the entire market for legal services and reducing the risk your firm and your clients are taking. We even discuss what AI is likely to bring to the practice of law. This is a fascinating interview and one that could change the way you practice for the better. Let's get to it. I'm John Strohmeyer, and this is the 5-Star Counsel Podcast. The market for legal services is shifting, and lawyers who don't adapt will be left behind. This podcast gives you a competitive edge in today's market by sharing the client service lessons you probably didn't learn in law school or in law practice. Let's start the show. Hey 5-Star listeners, before we start, I want to tell you about our amazing sponsor, Smith AI. Smith AI is a virtual receptionist service for small businesses with a specialty in working with solo and small law firms. I signed up with them within weeks of starting my firm because they are affordable for even the smallest solo practice. Their friendly receptionists respond to potential clients in Spanish or English, screen and schedule new leads, and can even take payments. And now they're answering calls 24 hours a day. So even when you're asleep, they're still working. Even beyond the phone, they've got live agents and chatbots ready to capture leads on your website, by text, and by Facebook Messenger. Smith's friendly gatekeepers can staff your front line so you can work uninterrupted. You can finally have the peace of mind that while you're working, you're not missing out on future work. Plans start at just $70 a month for calls and $100 a month for chats. Smith AI is offering a free trial, and our podcast listeners get an extra $100 discount code with promo code 5-star. That's FIVESTAR. Sign up and learn more at www.smith.ai. Don't let another day go by. Try Smith AI. Ed, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, John.
So I was a little disappointed. We were at Tech Show a couple weeks ago, and we didn't get to see you there, but hey, here we are now.
Yeah, sorry to miss you.
So you are, I always think of you as the guy who knows probably more about data analytics. You're the person to talk to when it comes to things like this. There are many ways we're going to go today, but I figure I'll just let you kind of start with what are you excited about when it comes to data in the law right now?
One thing I'm really excited about is the frontier of things that aren't unknowable, but are just unknown. Law is trailing about 20 years behind leading industries in data analysis and AI. And I think that history can give us an interesting guide for law. If you look at what happened in finance, for example, 20 years ago, it's a great template for what might be possible in law. 20 years ago, finance geeks, people who were thinking about finance quantitatively, sometimes pejoratively called quants, took all of this historic stock trading data and historical information about companies, and for the first time, kind of harmonized it, put it in a common format, and tagged it so you could understand it, and then just ran like very simple regression analysis against it. You would call it AI today, but back then they just said it's, simple regression. You do some line drawing through the history to see what that tells us about the future. And these quants were the first high frequency traders. They created whole new industries around finance, and probably created $5 trillion worth of alpha, a competitive advantage created by information for people who had it over people who didn't. And these quants became ludicrously wealthy. They created all kinds of wealth for their clients, but they also stabilized markets. They rationalized markets that had been irrational in the past. And that's kind of the way I think about law today. It's a market that is hunch driven. It is almost inherently irrational. When our clients come to us, they bring us their hardest problems. If they are family law clients, they'll ask, how long is my brother going to serve if they plea out of this deal? Who gets custody of my kids in this divorce? If you're a corporate law client, some of these can be bet the company questions, like how much risk are we exposed to here? Is this a market price that we're paying? If we engage in this bet the company litigation, are we likely to win? Right? And we as lawyers take these most important questions of clients, these existential, most important family questions, bet the company questions, and we answer them with our experience. But oftentimes our experience looks like 2 or 3 different matters. I think that would be very unnerving for our clients to know, right? Social scientists would call this kind of decision making, where it's a very important matter based on 2 or 3 data points, a hunch, right? And
Right.
so it's an ugly truth of the practice of law today, just like it was for your financial advisor 25 years ago, that a lot of these important decisions are being made based on hunches, right? And so one thing I'm really excited about is pushing this frontier so that lawyers and law firms can give counsel based on solid judgment, but solid judgment that is informed by quantitative data. It doesn't take the lawyer out of the equation. It doesn't suggest that clients should make their own decisions based on the data, but it does mean that a lawyer informed by good quality data is almost always going to outperform a lawyer who has no data or anec-data or very good hunches.
Right. There are a number of things that come to mind. Before I went to law school, I thought I was going to be a doctor, and I still listened to a few podcasts on medicine. One of the things I've heard multiple times was the most dangerous thing you can hear a doctor ever say is "in my experience," followed by some recommendation. And it seems to line up with what we're doing, because you're getting just that restricted version of anecdata to guide the doctor, the lawyer, the CPA, the whoever it is who's making big expensive decisions for you. You'd like them to have something a little bit better than just the hunch, the anecdata, the whatever it is. And so that's how we get double blind studies in science to help guide and make sure we're not bringing in our own bad data. But for lawyers, we're limited because we're not going to do a bunch of test cases.
That's a fascinating analogy, John. I've been reading this book called The Great Pandemic by John Barry about the pandemic of 1917, 1918 around the world. And one of the fascinating parts about that book is it's a profile of what medicine was like in 1917. And doctors weren't even really licensed at the time. Doctors' jobs were to make people basically feel better while they healed themselves. Doctors weren't subjected to a lot of trial and error. Medical school wasn't science based. And so there was a class of doctors coming up around the turn of the century who formed Johns Hopkins and other research facilities so you could study medicine as a science. And the idea was pretty radical at the time. The idea that medicine would be based on science seemed to depersonalize it and devalue the role that doctors played, and made them something cold and clinical. But I do think there's an interesting parallel to law, because today the idea that law is a science is almost heretical. The idea that one matter can be understood with the context of matters that came before it, um, seems almost naive to many lawyers. But I think if you look back 100 years from now at this period, the way that we approach each matter as a special snowflake will seem somewhat quaint.
Right.
Uh, and so the introduction of science, and particularly maybe data science, to law is a fascinating frontier.
Yeah. Before I let us go too far, I will say the one thing I remember when and I struggled with as a person with a science background, like I had a BS in zoology, thought I was going to med school, changed my mind in college. Science works based on here's the evidence, and we kind of wrap it all in. When I got to my first job as a lawyer, one of the things I struggled with was lawyers who treated the law as though science worked in the same way, in which, well, as long as you can make a good argument, it's going to work. And we could kind of see our way, like, well, you never know. A judge may agree with us or may not. We might as well throw it up against the wall and see if it sticks. Versus the science of, like, once we have some evidence that it's not going to work, we kind of shut down that line and we don't go back there, even if there's a stray judge who might accept it. The idea of, neutrons, protons, and electrons only work in a few certain ways. And I think, to kind of bring us back to what we're talking about, it's once we get better data about how things work, knowing that Judge Stone is, 78% likely to rule in X way to Y type of motion, it's going to change things. And it doesn't mean we're always, it's zero. It's here are the 22% of times. What do those 22% look like?
That's a great point. What do they have in common? If we're going to make the motion,
Right.
what can we extract from these winners that give us the best possibility of success? So that doesn't mean that you're going to, win 79% of the time or 22% of the time. But if you're able to extract some piece of information from the winning cases, maybe it's 50-50.
Right.
But if you don't have that information, it's 22%.
Right. And I mean, again, you haven't said it yet, but I've heard you say this enough. It's, how is the practice going to change once we actually have data instead of hunches? How is law going to transform? And so it's kind of a big softball. What do you think this looks like when we just are turned into cold clinicians analyzing data?
Well, hopefully it professionalizes legal services. Hopefully it makes them more accessible to more people. So, I'll look at, the history of finance. More people participated in the stock market after the quant revolution than before. If you look at most data science history, I love the history of maps. I'm a huge map geek. And if you look at cartography, it started, in the days before there were good maps, nobody would travel. It was too risky. You didn't know when you started if you'd have enough money to be, liquid at the end, if you'd run out of food. Travel was dangerous, and only the most wealthy or risk-averse people ever did it. And when they did, they would use navigators. They would have someone do the trip with them who had done the trip before. Um, but so what would happen was these navigators would come together and they would start telling stories. They would share their experiences with each other, at first orally, but then in written maps. And they would show the path they had taken, where a bridge had washed out, where there was something treacherous, where a road was particularly precarious. And then these became the foundation for early maps. As maps evolved and as the digital collection of this information from space became more possible, did it mean there were no more navigators? No, there was more navigators than ever, because there were way more people who were willing to take those trips. There was a lot more certainty around them, and so people would then take them. It's always my contention that one of the big problems with legal services today, one of the big reasons that only 20% of people with legal problems resolve those through the legal system, is not money but risk. It's not like people can't afford to hire a lawyer. It's because all of the risk for hiring a lawyer is placed on the client. And that's a bad fit for the delivery of those services. And so it's the risk that keeps people away. The more you apply science, the more you understand better what's going to happen to these transactions. If you say, if you do this, there is a 82% chance you'll get custody of your kids, and it's going to cost $875 from beginning to end, the more people are going to say, I'm willing to work with a lawyer to have that outcome. And that means more people avail themselves of legal services and more people have access to the legal system. But it also means a much larger pie for people who practice law.
Yeah, and so coming back to the word that is probably triggering for most lawyers was well, you professionalize our services. We were already professionals. The way I kind of interpret this is it's taking it less out of the slot machine risk and more candy machine. You put the dollar in, you're probably, you don't know if you'll get the jumbo size Snickers, but you probably get some sort of a Snicker.
Yeah, well, I would just say that you know the legal profession already observes the highest standards of professionalism and ethics. It is a profession and not a trade. That's really not what I mean by that. At the same time, meteorologists were professionals in the 1900s, even though they didn't understand weather particularly well, right? I mean, they were very good at what they did based on the science they had available, but their potential was so much greater. And with the availability of climate data, they're much better able to do their job. And I'll just note, like, this is when those forecasts became more available, when computer modeling of weather became more accessible and better at predicting the future. It didn't eliminate meteorologists. We still have lots of meteorologists who have to understand the models, interpret the models, work the models, explain the models, maybe more than ever. And so the same thing with legal services. When we have better access to data and tools, we're just going to be better at what we do. It doesn't mean that we're not very professional now. It just means that from a client's perspective, we'll just be better at the work. We'll achieve better results, and we'll have more knowability at the beginning of the process than we do today.
Right. And so this then gets into the next kind of big bugaboo or things people are worried about is, artificial intelligence, AI. Oh my God, are the machines coming over the hill to take all of our jobs?
The robot lawyer.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just say, like, whenever you see in the cover image of the article, like a lawyer's hand or a client's hand shaking hands with a robot, like, you can just stop reading.
It only works on the back cover of what Pink Floyd album is that? Is that now Bobby's yelling at me through the ear right now.
Well, if someone tells you that robot lawyers are coming to take your job, you can pretty well discount that advice. But one thing I'll say is that AI will be a part of that story. So at Fastcase, one of the things we're doing right now is we are collecting this data that I've been talking about to understand what happens in different cases that are filed in state and federal court. We're not handing that over to a magic Jeopardy playing robot, right? But we are using simple things like natural language processing to understand how much money is in the dispute, like who won or lost each cause of action in a case. Even though the notorious PACER nature of suit code says it might be one kind of case, they're always wrong. And so we can use some simple natural language processing to understand what cases are about. And then we can understand the data in a more systematic way. For the super geeks in the audience, we're using the SALI Legal Matter Standard Specification 2.0 to tag this data so that anyone who works with legal data in another organization can ingest and understand that for themselves. But for those who are not super data geeks, all we're asking is what happened. Academics, like law school professors, would call this empirical legal studies. But I would just say, this is just a large-scale answer to the question: when you file a motion for summary judgment in Harris County versus Bexar County, what's the likelihood that it's going to be granted? If I file a case in this court versus that court, how likely am I to get a decision within 2 years? And if I'm a corporation and I have lawsuits going on in 42 states, what's the seasonality of them? Is this a lot compared to last year or the year before? Is there a place where we're getting sued more than ever, and so maybe we need to get some training for some of our managers? These are all the things I was talking about at the front end. These are not yet known, but not unknowable. They're just unknown. These are stories that are hiding in plain sight in the data that we can understand as lawyers and practitioners. In the same way that doctors couldn't aggregate thousands of cases in a county medical practice. But once medicine became more quantitative, they could have hypotheses about how things might work or not and compare them across much larger data sets to help serve each individual patient better.
Matters were filed, because before then I would have said, I don't know, million bajillion. And then I got an answer and it was 11,721. And that includes both true probates as well as guardianships. And just taking a sample size of the first week or so of data, realized, oh, well, about this many probates get filed and about this many guardianships got filed in that first week. And this is how they all broke out. And just kind of even looking at that, resolving it down to, oh, I now know roughly how many get filed here in Harris County. I can look at the at least total market size of the number of people who are filing. What does that look like? With 11,000 matters, to share a little firm secret, we're negligible. Like it's a rounding error on the total number of filings. But even knowing that, we can start to see, all right, well, this is where we are. What would, if we double it, is that really taking anything away from anybody? What does that look like? And even thinking about, all right, well, people ask all the time, how long will this take? It's the sort of thing we could go in and start figuring out, well, for this type of matter, generally you're going to get heard this far away from your filing date.
That's exactly what we're talking about. And from a client's perspective, the North Star of our profession, always the client's perspective. Wouldn't you rather work with your law firm, which can tell you this is how long it's going to take, this is what your likely outcome is going to be, these are the steps involved, than to someone who says, I've got a really good feeling about this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is going to be one of those advantages like the alpha we talked about in finance markets. Lawyers will be able to do this kind of research. And again, like this is something we're trying to power in Fastcase's docket alarm product. I'm not trying to sell it. I'm just describing. So we're pulling all of these cases from Harris County courts, the docket sheet, and then the dockets underneath it. And then, running this really interesting kind of natural language parser that we acquired when we acquired the assets of Judicata, a company in California. And then, being able to say, look, take it quantitatively. We'll take the 200,000 probate cases we have in Harris County with all of the tag data and then just export it. If you want them, you can download it from Docket Alarm, get it in Excel format, or if you're a geek, you can get it in JSON format or XML format. But for most lawyers, just get it in a spreadsheet and then figure out, like, how long did they take? Who were the parties? Who were the judges? And a lot of this work doesn't require fancy tools. It requires counting, which you can do in Microsoft Excel. This is a frontier I'm excited about. If we can empower people to do this kind of analysis for themselves, to take quantitative data and then figure out, there's no way we're going to win this motion, so we're going to game the system by not filing. Or we know that when we do this, the other party is going to do this other thing, and we can use that to our advantage. Or we can just win business by saying we know more about a client quantitatively than they know about themselves. Right. My favorite legend from the map. Here there be dragons. But like I can look at these kind of the big data inside of Docket Alarm, and I can see, look, for a corporate client, what law firms do they use, and how does that change over time? Is my law firm losing share with this client? One of the things I love to do is I'll go to a corporate legal department or a law firm, and I'll say, like, who's your biggest client? Do you do most of their representation? And they'll say, yes, we're the biggest company who represents Amazon. And I'll say, what if I told you you're number three? And last year you were number four. That's a surprise. And this stuff is not, again, like, this isn't data magic. This is counting, but it's counting at scale. And this is a frontier that's going to be really important for our practice.
Right. And it's for everybody's practice, just thinking about it's not just the pure competitiveness to go and grab that other share of the market. It's ultimately, how can you as a lawyer be better so that you could grab more of the share of the market? If you're at firm X and if you're third place with Amazon, what do you need to do to take over that number two spot? What is number two and number one doing? So that you can figure out, ultimately, that will have, for Amazon, obviously, the dollar values are such that it will trickle down to other firms leading from or learning from what you're doing there.
Yeah, I think of the Moneyball scene where the old baseball scouts are sitting around the conference room table saying, this guy's got a good baseball face. It's there's a lot of that in our profession. I know this judge because I helped her run for office. I play golf with her. I raise money for her. But do you really know what that judge is going to do in your case? Like, you really don't. You better not. There's a lot of this kind of like old scouting going on in our profession, but it will be this kind of Billy Bean class of lawyers who are able to know more than everybody else going in, and to use that to the advantage of their clients, so they can compete, asymmetrically. So they can do a practice of law that is quantitatively different than what everybody else is doing. It's a new class of legal services that lawyers can provide. And by the way, like, lest you think I'm talking about like magical, robot lawyers, lawyers can do this with their own billing systems. Tag your own matters and look back and see, like, when they started and when you closed the file. Talk about the 22 matters that you've conducted over the years and how they went, and just look at a bell curve of what the outcomes were.
Right.
Even very simple understanding of what your firm does can be a strategic advantage.
Right. Just thinking, the easy step starts with the pad and legal pen, or legal pad and pen, and just coming up, taking the thoughts that you've got, the simple data, and just writing it down. Even for me, who, like, I'm really comfortable with pivot tables in Excel, long before that, you've just got to start even figuring out how can you categorize it. And then that led us back in the firm to recategorizing matters, so that we've got, I'm going to guess, 20 odd different types of matters, so that we can more effectively see, oh, well, this is, it's not just estate planning, it's estate planning at one tier for a single person versus estate planning at a higher tier. And just knowing this is how this works has helped us see, oh, okay, well, here are the matters we're trying to track as the KPIs for the firm going forward.
My bet is that you're a more profitable lawyer because of it.
Yeah, I mean, it even beyond the profits, which are nice, it helps me sleep better at night, because I know, oh, well, this is what we're looking at when people come in. We've got rough ideas on the number of matters that come in, they're mostly going to kind of shake out to be this number. So if we put more quarters in the machine, we're more likely to get certain results at the end.
But you see these lawyers who are going broke by getting busy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who have these matters that turn the hours and show up on the sheets and everything else, but at the end of the year they don't have any money,
Right.
and they can understand the revenues but not the profits. I'll share a pet peeve of mine. I will occasionally hear a lawyer say, like, I'm what you might call technologically illiterate, or I'm a Luddite. They'll brag to me, and man, I just can't help feeling like if you say that to a client or if you say that in public, it just makes you sound like unemployable. If
Right.
someone said, like, I can't use a telephone, would you ever hire that lawyer? Like, you would not. If they said, send me a fax, you wouldn't hire that lawyer. And when you say, like, I don't do the computer stuff, or I can't count, I can't tell you how much these matters have cost my firm in the past, increasingly it makes you sound illiterate to clients. And we will be able to answer these questions. As we are, you're going to have to stay competitive. You're going to have to be able to answer the simple, fundamental questions. I'm a client now, so Fastcase employs a bunch of law firms. And when I start a law firm engagement, I'll just say, how many matters like this have you handled? And give me a range. Tell me what the costs were in the aggregate. I don't want to know anything about any of your clients, but show me what the bell curve looks like. What were your results from these? And sometimes when I say, how much is this going to cost, the law firm will say it's going to cost you $695 times however many hours we spend on the case. And
That's not a good answer.
No, I don't use those firms, right? And sometimes they'll say, like, I can't give you a guarantee, but the low is 15,000, the high is 27,000, the average is 22, and the ones that are more than 25 tend to have these features that your representation doesn't. That's awesome. That's all I need. That helps me understand I can budget for that for next year as a client. And there's very little risk to me that it's going to be $110,000.
Right. Excellent. Well, Ed, I think this is a good enough place to cut off. We could probably keep going for hours.
I'm just getting warmed up, John.
Yeah. That's what Clio will be for this fall.
Right.
So, Ed, where can we find you?
You can find me at fastcase.com or docketalarm.com. You can also find me on Twitter at EJWalters.
Excellent. Ed, thanks so much for joining us.
John, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find more info on us and get your free white paper on client service at 5starcounsel.com. You can get in touch with me at john@5starcounsel.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe wherever fine podcasts are found and leave us a review wherever you can.